All right. Well, while people are piling in here, we're just a couple minutes past 5 o'clock Pacific time, 8 o'clock Eastern time. And we are getting started today with another wonderful AMA here at CS Career Hub. Right now, we have a couple interesting folks here on the voice chat. We have Carl, Vitullo, and Evan. And we're going to be discussing veteran job hoppers' experiences at opposite ends of the spectrum. Now, we also have Brenda here in the chat as well, who is available to offer her insight and her 2 cents here and there, whatever she's interested in sharing with us today.
Mostly just moderating, though.
Absolutely. But just so that people have a little bit more context about what the conversation is going to be about today. Last time we were talking about building a career, during college, from serial interns to new grads, where we largely talked about the perspective of Brenda and Gopher and how they were going from, various internships and starting their careers very early to get their foot in the door where they are now. Now we're going to talk about something a little different with these veteran job hoppers, Kevin and Carl, in which their perspective sort of lends to people who are maybe just getting started with their career, after graduation or a little further down the road, depending on how you like to shape your career, in which you change your positions frequently in an attempt to either build up your compensation or just quickly find what's the right fit for you. To give a little bit of background on each of them, Kevin is a creator of CSCH, our humble lord, and began his career in the Navy. After serving for 5 years, he left to start his path in electrical engineering, but somewhere along the way, he transitioned to software. Since then, he has worked at Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and TripAdvisor as a software engineer. On the other hand, we have Carl Vitullo, aka vcarl, one of our wonderful senior moderators here in CSCH, as well as over at Reactiflux. Be sure to check it out. Since his first software job back in 2012, he's worked for 8 different companies, ranging from a local print shop to a Fortune 50 company as well. He's worked for companies doing transit, agriculture, technology, advertising, finance, healthcare, and cryptocurrency, almost exclusively doing front-end web development with React. So this is a pretty interesting cadre we have going here, a pretty interesting crew that will be sitting here and, like last time, discussing your questions. We opened up the chat to everybody here in CS Career Hub over at Event Questions, where you could drop in what you want to know from the perspective of Kevin and Carl. But in addition to that, we also have our voice chat. So as we go through these questions that have already been submitted during the week, if you're brave enough and you want to hop on and ask your question directly, please do. It's a part of the experience and we'd love to hear from you. Now, with that being said, let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and take a quick look at our first question, which is coming from one of our community contributors, Char. What does a good manager look like to you? And I'm going to open that up to the floor.
I can take that to start. I've had a lot of managers in the years I've been working. Most of the best of my managers really came closer to the benign end of that scale. The most impactful people above me in my career have been not my direct manager, but people of them who were directly able to affect things like compensation packages and things like that. For example, at my current position, I had actually never requested a raise or really had to particularly strongly advocate for myself in that way, because that is because as I've worked for smaller teams, it's just easier to my impacts recognized. My managers know what I'm up to. When it comes time for review season, I don't really need to have that much effort into tracking my own accomplishments and advocating for them because they're just known. Just it's been much easier to be recognized in that way. Really, I think that's one of the most important things for a good manager is to be aware of your accomplishments are, what your skills are, and what you've been able to contribute. Some of the worst managers I've had have been so focused on micro optimizing, trying to min max invested into into whatever we're building. The absolute lowest manager estimation, at one point instituted a policy where everyone on the team was required to use a Slack command to notify him if we had been blocked and made progress in 15 minutes, which is a difficult decision to make. Am I blocked or am I just spending 15 minutes solving a problem? So, that was my shortest tenure of my career at just over 4 months. My best managers have really attention to what I'm interested in and me and opportunities to grow my skills in the direction I want while also recognizing my efforts and compensating me appropriately.
Good insight. Sounds like you had most success with people who are leading you organically and really, leaning into what your needs were and trying to get that insight over time. Kevin,
Absolutely.
what's been your experience?
It's kind of funny. I can't really, I mean, I can, but I have a harder time telling you what a good manager is than a bad one. It seems like in my career, it's either been bad or they're awesome. What I've seen, at least in computer science, and this definitely varies in other areas, is that a good manager doesn't manage you. Doesn't even really manage projects, but manages your career. That you're self-sufficient in the projects, you're self-sufficient in your job. And they're only there to help you get where you need to be in your career. So I've had awesome managers where we'd show up for a one-on-one and talk about, hey, here's where you're at, or here's where you want to be, and here's how far off you are. And we'd have progress checks on that, but we would never actually discuss anything with the project unless I was blocked. And even then, the project managers did most of that. Yeah, so usually when they do that, they're pretty good managers. I've had a couple bad ones. Like Carl said, they're just focused on metrics, micromanagement, and just not great around. They don't care about your career, they care about theirs. Very narcissistic, basically. I've found that my experience has been polar opposites. There's no in between. They're either really good or they're really bad.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult to find somebody who can hit all those marks, right? The one who can understand the field because they are themselves technically qualified and be prepared to handle all of the people problems that come with being a good manager, right? It's actually a very tough skill set and one that comes up a lot in the chat.
Yeah.
There's often, I'm sure Carl feels very strongly about this in a way, in terms of how people perceive management and the challenges that entails. But yeah, great response.
And I have one more addition. Just one unfortunate thing with one of my managers, and he wasn't a bad manager. He's a good one, but he was a skip manager, which means he was responsible for everyone and kind of was more hands off. And that's kind of something I look for now when I look for a job. It's like, will the manager be there and be able to work with us at least once every couple of weeks?
And I think one of the other facets of management that makes it difficult to evaluate whether that you have is good or bad is that there's a lot of different types of approaches that each have, you can be a very successful manager in several different ways. I have had managers who I thought were awful working for them out under them as quickly as I could, who were seen by the company as excellent managers because they hit metrics and their OKRs and their performance indicators and everything like that. Obviously, from my perspective, that's a bad one. I think from most of their underlings' perspective, they were not a good manager. But, they were very successful. Then there's also, I think, the types of managers who will have the effect and ship of their reports. Some who are going to be more focused on, or are able to resolve interpersonal conflicts, or more interested in talking about interpersonal conflicts, or what's going on with your life, or being manage all of you and your work, help you. Like my manager multiple times has told me to take more time off in the past. I had only taken a week in like September or something. And I distinctly remember him telling me, probably just take all of December off if you want. It's one of the things that I think makes a really good manager. Knows that in order to get the most out of you at work, you spend some time away from work. It's on all of you.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree. The manager has to see you as the whole person, right? Not just the cog, because cogs get worn out, but they have to. It sounds like you have actually taken that into account with your management as well in terms of your skill, bringing it to the job. So, yeah, so I actually, I think we have somebody here who raised their hand. It often takes a little bit of time to get somebody brave enough to raise their hand. So we have Oats of Panzer in the chat who requested to speak. Let's get their question right now. See what they have to say. Oats of Panzer, welcome. You are now in front of the team. What's your question?
Hiring managers, right? I just got here in the software engineering industry. Yeah. Anyway, would you guys recommend LinkedIn? Like, do hiring managers really scour the pages of LinkedIn to find their candidate, or I don't know. Like, I'm having trouble even getting the first interview. So I'm just kind of like throwing the line out there and seeing if I can get some ideas on how I can score that first interview in today's kind of world where everyone's going online and I'm not huge on social media or anything. So I'm just kind of seeing what you guys are looking for.
So, just a heads up, this isn't really a hiring manager one. That's next week. Not next week, like 2 or 3 weeks from now. But kind of the answer to the question, though, from my experience, when you're not getting interviews or even requests, it usually comes down to your resume more than anything. It doesn't jump out. It's not jumping past every other candidate they see. In that case, I recommend like getting some reviews, getting several eyes on it, and even your LinkedIn profile, maybe getting advice with that. And then once that's set, you usually start to get your calls.
I'd agree with that. Specifically about LinkedIn, I have ignored a great many targeted LinkedIn messages from recruiters or hiring managers. But I also got my current job through a cold message on LinkedIn. So there's a lot of noise on there, but there's also some pretty good signal. I think it probably doesn't you very directly, but it is out there. So I like Kevin that once resumes have a little bit of a footprint, once you've got your foot in the door, then becomes a lot more valuable.
Good insight and good question, by the way. We appreciate I know that this was targeted at the job hopper experience, but frankly, Kevin and Carl are both very qualified to speak to some degree to these questions as well. So while we do have a subject, bear in mind, maybe you have something that will help expand on the topic that's relevant to everybody here. So for those of you raising your hands and submitting questions, we thank you. And I'm going to bring it back over to our list of questions we got from earlier this week. We actually have one from our very own Slacker Sam, one of our moderators. What has been your longest tenure at a job, and what made you stay so long? Considering the topic, I think this is a pretty good one. So I kind of want to see what Carl has to say here, especially since the numbers are so great. Actually, let me start with Kevin, since Carl is doing a little audio adjustment.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry for the cough. If anyone heard that, apparently I can't drink water.
You're all good.
Yeah, so my highest tenure, except for the Navy because that was forced tenure, I'd say about 2 years and 9 months when I was at Microsoft. I don't know why I stayed that long, to be honest. It was not the right job for me. I should have left way earlier. I think it was just easy. It was basically updating VMs every month and running config files. So it's just basic stuff that you can really just get away from doing work. But it wasn't a great job. It wasn't something I enjoyed. And I think as a result, I could have gotten a job start elsewhere after that time. So I don't know why I stuck around that long. I should have left. But yeah, just under 3 years, basically.
And my current job is actually my longest tenure. Although it's slightly qualified because while working on the same computer with the same manager, I have technically worked for 3 different companies due to mergers and reorganizations. I think the reason I stayed so long is really because of the team I was around. Actually, it's begun to cross my mind. We've now grown to the point where that small team is no longer quite the environment is no longer the same as when I joined it. So it's begun to cross my mind of whether it's still somewhere I want to continue to be for the longer term. But in the for the foreseeable future, I have no intention to leave. It's still a phenomenal workplace. I think what has made me stay so long is that I've never doubted whether my manager had my back. I've always felt that if I have an issue with something, he will trust that he's not going to be working against me. He'll be on my side. And part of that is because I've been there so long and worked with him. We have this great rapport. So it's sort of a self-fulfilling, or it's a reinforcing cycle. By being there so long under the same manager, we have a good relationship, and the good relationship is what keeps me there.
Great response, and something that I'm sure quite a few people who have been in the industry for a while can relate to, who stuck it out somewhere just because of the people factor, right? So definitely something.
Yeah. The common wisdom that people don't quit jobs, they quit managers. And I think the reverse is true as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm quite pleased to see that we have more hands popping up, wanted to ask questions. So let me go ahead and bring in our next bold member here. We have Moni Sinome. Bringing them in now. Welcome
Hi.
to the chat.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me fine?
Yep. Sound great.
Yeah, so I guess this is from the very first question that was answered, and this was about what determines a good or bad manager. And I think it was Kevin who responded with the answer that the managers who are overly focused on metrics they are not really that great. So like, would you mind giving more specific kind of examples? Like I had a former manager who's kind of like, uh, people like devs at a certain level, they need to have, this many PRs merged a week, and then they enforce like these communication standards on the team saying like, if there's a Jira ticket, then you need to respond to it within an hour, and within the core hours, you need to respond to any Slack threads or messages within 15 minutes. And it was fairly absurd, but I'm wondering like if you have any other examples that, come up to mind.
Great question. Who wants to take it?
I could take that. Lines of code is the metric I hate the most. I refactor every chance I get. In fact, my lines of code probably are negative as a result. But in a week I'll write 2,000 or 3,000 lines of code and then narrow it down to like 200. And in some cases, I'll find a library to do it in like 10 lines of code. And the managers who care about lines of code, if they see 10 lines of code, even though it's a working service or a working thing, in their eyes, I'm a lazy engineer that hasn't done anything all week. Even though that, to the contrary, I have a brand new service that works perfectly good. That one I hate the most. PRs, kind of similar concept. PRs don't really showcase you as an engineer, especially when you spend all week solving something complicated and then just submitting a simple solution at the end. Those are the two I hate. It doesn't apply to me, but managers that care about office hours and after COVID, the fact that you work at home or work from the office, stuff like that.
Thanks for the follow-up feedback.
And I'll think one of the other ways that managers end up say that on metrics is a different category of metrics, which is like the business metrics. It's not so much measuring the activity of the people on their team. It's things like the performance or the user retention or the mean recurring revenue, all those sorts of business acronyms. I would say I think that those sort of activity metrics, like PRs, lines of code, SLAs on communication with coworkers, are SLAs on communication. I can kind of understand the motivations for. I think those are usually better left as like conventions or culture on a team rather than firm rules. The rest of those, I think, are strong signs of a toxic workplace. Those remind me of things that made me leave jobs pretty quick. I think it just belies a certain level of insecurity on the part, a level of insecurity and a lack of trust in the people that report to them, saying, I don't trust that you're going to do things if I don't keep my eye on you. And so here's the ways I expect to be able to keep my eyes on you. Some of my other bad managers I've not enjoyed working for have been so focused on shipping a new feature, doing something to improve the metrics, just really getting tunnel visioned on the observable aspects of whatever we're building, that it ends up into a place where there's no time allocated for the refactors or the developer feedback saying, okay, we've just crunched for 3 weeks shipping this feature. We need to decompress. We need to tackle some of the tech that we know we added. We need to take a little bit of a slow roll here. Yeah, some of the jobs that I've quit have been 12, 18 months down that road and now reaping what they've sown and no longer really able to ship changes to the app because they've just stacked hack on top of hack on top of hack and aren't able to be productive anymore.
Yeah, this is pretty interesting just because, and I want to, revisit the topic for those of you who are just now joining us. since we're dealing with, Kevin, who's coming from established work cultures at Google, Amazon, Microsoft, TripAdvisor, to see that Carl, in a way, going through the startup world and seeing how that all varies so much, as well as the Fortune 50 companies, that it's interesting how you will find some commonalities in both, and then things that are distinctly unique just based on the nature of the business in each world. And that's something that I'm sure everybody who's working right now can understand and appreciate. Like for myself, I work in a very maintenance oriented environment, and so everything is geared towards that. And so my problems are not exactly the same as Carl's or Kevin's, but at the end of the day, the nature of how my manager, good or bad, can relate very similarly. So good insight all around. Now, I'm going to jump back over to our list of questions. We have one here from our very own bot developer, Nick. How have your metrics for target companies changed as you changed jobs? Like, what did you look for in job one versus what you were looking for in the job afterwards and or beyond?
I guess I could go with that. I mean, obviously, job one was I want a job and money, and I think working at a company would be awesome. Obviously, that's not really the case anymore. Now I look at more of how much am I going to be doing for architectural design and doing the tech lead side of things. How much time am I actually going to spend on coding? Like, I don't expect to do more than 15, 20 hours of coding a week anymore. Most of it is more actual design and meetings, unfortunately. I always ask about meetings, though. I hate meetings with a passion. You can ask any of my old managers. Yeah, that's one big metric. Obviously, I look for promos and raises and things like that when I'm ready to move. So that's my N plus one is also the promo. So yeah, work and money, basically. The amount of work and the type of work and money.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty comprehensive. That kind of covers all the bases: type of work, money. Ultimately, for me, I've known that I had a very particular desire for what type of place I work at, which has never really included things like what industry or type of, what type of effect on the world I'd be having. I want to have some kind of effect, but ultimately I'm just happy if I'm making, making some kind of web app. Ultimately, I think what really informed my job hopping was that very early in my career, actually my first job was at a student startup, and just by virtue of staying there the longest, I ended up as, CTO in air quotes, because when you're 21, your capacity to be CTO for a bunch of other students is not exactly the same as anywhere else. But in trying to do a good job of that, I read a number of books on how to be a software manager. And I really think that that choice of reading those kind of books that early in my career is what gave me a set of expectations for what my managers should be doing. So when, I'm reading a book and saying, oh, my manager's doing all this stuff that this book says you should explicitly lays out as a bad practice, that gave me a framework to, one, bring it up with them, in a very diplomatic, tactful way to say, I've noticed we're doing this. Maybe we should try doing this practice instead. And then if that fails, and if that fails too many times, deciding, okay, this is not the manager for me. I need to look for somewhere else.
So actually, I'm gonna take that idea real quick because it actually dovetails into one of our other questions from one of our server contributors, Harp, and I think it's something that both you and Kevin have somewhat touched on, but essentially, how do you know when to make that hop from one workplace to the next? Like, how is it oftentimes driven by your current circumstance, or have you found that oftentimes you're just looking for something else beyond, like, in addition to what you have now?
Well, actually, in my case, many of my hops were not voluntary. I got fired from my first student startup. The company later folded, and actually, after I was fired, 4 of the remaining 5 people on the team quit. So the company essentially imploded. After that, two jobs after that, I was laid off. Job after that, actually got a little bit bait and switched. The role I ended up doing was not the role that had been advertised, nor what I expected to be doing. I thought I was going to be doing a lot of JavaScript and web development, and I ended up spending about 70% of my time on Hadoop. Very much not the same thing.
Right.
And they ended up forcing me out of the company by means of presenting me with a pip and saying that I could either sign it or pack up my desk, and I chose to pack up my desk. I was also I was moving out of state about 3 weeks after that, so it was a very easy choice for me. The job after that was my shortest tenure with the manager who wanted 15-minute blocker check-ins. That one I quit because 4 days in a row I woke up with this sinking pit of dread, this physical feeling in my chest that I didn't want to go into work. And so I drafted a letter and put in my notice, and they accepted it immediately. And I actually did not, I was not able to say goodbye to my remote coworkers before they cut off my access to Slack. After that, yeah, it was, I've had a relatively brutal series of job transitions. After that, I was at the Fortune 50 company, and that one I could have stayed at longer. I only spent about 6 months there, but then I got a cold outreach to work for my current company, and it was, while I was going through the interview, I learned that the team was being assembled by someone whose products I had used in both high school and college, and whose book I had read. So it was just too good an opportunity to pass up. So all of my transitions have been somewhat exceptional in one way or another, and I'm not sure that there's a whole lot of general insight I can offer on when to change jobs.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, your specific experience is very tumultuous, to put it nicely. Yeah, I didn't know, Kevin, if you had any insight, if you felt like Carl did a good job there.
I don't remember the question. What was that?
Sure, no problem. There was a lot. So essentially, how did you know when to hop from one to the from one job to the next? And I think you had mentioned when you were looking for essentially something new, and essentially better compensation to go along with it.
I'm going to be completely honest. After the first job, it was Google. I never really decided to hop. I never looked for a new job. I just got recruiters and people reaching out to me saying, "Hey, come work for me. Here's this." When it happens, I evaluate where I'm at and what I'm doing, and if I wanted something new. Google, when that happened, I was in California, which I still wasn't a fan of working in California, and Microsoft said, "Hey, come work for us." TripAdvisor, when I left Microsoft, it was kind of Jeremy, one of the mods here, was kind of the manager of the manager of the manager. And he posted a job, and I was just talking to him, and it got around to, yeah, let's try it out. And I think the only time where I got to a point where it was kind of things are looking downhill was TripAdvisor. Is at the beginning of COVID. There was, I think, talks of or rumors of layoffs with COVID and all that. And it felt kind of time to find something that wasn't based on travel or something that was going to be heavily affected by COVID. And Amazon just reached out at the right time and said, "Hey, let's interview." So that's kind of how when I decided, let's go.
Such different experiences between
Yeah.
the two of you. So polar opposite. We're
Yeah,
sticking
and-
true to the name.
Certainly opposites. One other point that I think is valuable to add here, even though most of my transitions were forced upon me and many were not in good circumstances, all but one of my job transitions accompanied by a raise, none smaller. I think with no raise smaller than 15%. So, after I switched jobs like 3 times, I was making well into the 6 figures, even though I don't have anything more than an associate's degree. So I found that even these forced transitions were beneficial. And one of the points of advice that I have given to a number of people in the past is that if you early in your career, if you're putting your personal time into developing yourself and developing your skills and career, most likely your compensation is not being updated at the same rate as your value. So many times, even if you burn a bridge, even if the bridge is burned for you, the transitions may end up being beneficial when you look back at them 5 years later.
Great point. Sometimes it's about reframing your experience and making sure that you take the benefits. And I keep thinking of MGMT right now. Take only what you need from it. So we've actually had a pretty in-depth talk based on a couple questions that were submitted. I think it's about time that we once again hear from you, the audience. Let's switch it up a little bit. And here we have a very active member. I'm gonna say that you pronounce it Cash. Feel free to hop on right now and correct me if I'm wrong. But let's get you in here and have you grill
Hey.
us. Welcome to the
How's
chat.
it going? Yeah, nice talk, guys. I want to ask a question and sort of highlight hidden value in job hopping to others listening right now. Have you guys had any experiences where friends and coworkers that you've met, friends that you've made previously, ended up being contacts at different places in the future that helped accelerate your career? And if you have had that experience, what have you done to help build those connections in your previous jobs?
Yeah, that has most definitely benefited me. My first job at the student startup, after I no longer worked there, one of my coworkers and friends, who I did continue to hang out with after we stopped working there together, he later referred me for a job at a Y Combinator startup locally that I got. And then someone I met at that job, after I got laid off, referred me. He had moved to be a VP of engineering for a new company, and he was staffing up a new team and thought of me since we'd worked together previously. That was in 2017. Since then, it's been largely random. I haven't really used my network too much. I have had a network of, a lot of the network has come through chat rooms like CSCH. In React-to-Flex, a number of folks are peers with me. We're in private chats together. We hang out. We've met up a few times at conferences or just socially. And I trust that if I ever found myself in need of a job, 3 or 4 of them would be willing to go to bat for me and refer me or walk me through the process or fast roll me or things like that. So Yeah, so that gets to how have I fostered that? I actually consider myself bad at being in touch with previous coworkers. So many of the people in my network, not folks that I've worked with as much as people that I've hung out in chat rooms with. Yeah, by contributing to CS Career Hub chat and getting to know people and going from the, I think it's good. I think it's most important to show your experience and your knowledge in the on-topic channels, but then branching out from there and befriending and staying in touch with folks elsewhere in the community, I think is a very valuable thing to do for your career.
Definitely agree with that. You know, we spend probably a disproportionate amount of time here in the chat, maybe even more than some of our most diehard members. I'm sure Kevin can speak to that.
I muted myself instead of unmuting. Apparently, I don't know how Discord works. I don't really use previous coworkers as kind of context as references to finding a new job. Usually, they stay there or they kind of do their own thing. I have gotten jobs, and there are people who I've met here or talked as a result of CS Career Hub, where I could probably call up and say, "Hey, I'm looking for something new. Got any spots? Let's interview." And I've done that once already, and worked for, well, not him, but he was the skip, so a few managers down. So I have gotten contacts through stuff like this and other means, but never really from previous coworkers that I worked with.
And I had a thought as well. This is something, how to stay in touch with people and how to develop a network is something that I don't think I'm good at it, but I have a number of friends who I think are excellent at it. And I asked them for advice. Really, the main thing they suggested was keeping track of, like, keeping notes on who you know, what they know, and what your relationship is with them. You know, it's sort of like using one option would be to use a personal CRM to keep track of things like when you talk to somebody and what you talked with them about. So then when you come back in 3 months and you're trying to think of who you would like to keep a relationship with because you find them interesting, because they're doing interesting work, because your interests align, having something like that will help you keep track of, oh yeah, I did meet that person at that conference. Maybe let me send them a message and maybe we can get coffee. Little things like that, just to keep those relationships at the fringe form, I think is one of the most valuable things you can do. I don't do it, I'm bad at it. That is a good way to, it takes a lot of effort, but it is a good way to develop a network.
Yeah, networking is something that I think a lot of us underappreciate here, especially because of the nature of our job, right? Because much of what we do it's so technical in nature. And so from our perspective, we're thinking, okay, I'm qualified for the job. You know, I spend every free waking moment on lead code. What do I need to talk to other humans for when everything I need is on this computer? And the truth is, you know, it's still people who are hiring you in the end, right? And so the human factor does matter the further along into your careers, you know, that you go. And that's something that actually is going to be really great when we talk to some of our more senior folks in our future AMA when it comes to how you get those jobs at the higher level and how sometimes you just bypass a lot of the major technical hurdles that you see early in your career as a new grad and maybe like your first transition to mid-level. So great question. Just wanted to acknowledge that. Great question so far with that. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back over here. And I think we have a pretty good follow-up to a question from before. So it should be pretty straightforward. This is coming from our very own offer collector, Semi-Awake at Work, who was actually in our trial AMA before. Semi asks, what has been your shortest tenure at a job and what made you leave so quickly? And I think you guys have touched on this a little bit, but I'll let you get into it if you have some interesting nuggets to share.
Yeah, I kind of already shared that one. It was TripAdvisor. Writing seemed a little bit on the wall that there might be some troubles with COVID, given that it's a travel company and every country was blocking travel. So I think I ended up being there for just over a year. Cool company. I'm sure they're probably doing a lot better now. I don't know if I would have left had I been there. I did enjoy being on the East Coast, and I enjoyed going down to Boston or down to Philly every weekend to play trumpet for drum corps. So I probably could have stuck around a little longer, but yeah, that might have been my shortest.
Understandable. That business got hit hard, so.
Yeah.
That's a
Carl.
rough industry to be working in at the start of COVID. Yeah, I definitely mentioned my shortest tenure earlier. The duration was 4 months and 3 weeks, and it was my shortest tenure largely because really because of my manager. When I joined, I was told that the project they were trying to staff up was a bang rewrite of basically their entire application. Which I came into it expecting that, I came into it with the understanding that many of those fail, many of those types of projects never produce anything of value and drag on for a very long period of time. And I remember early at a meeting, I said something to that effect, like, it's a very dangerous type of project to take on, but I'm new here. I'm going to trust that, this has been determined to be the best path forward. It was not. It was egregiously not. Less than 2 months after I joined, that Big Bang rewrite project got rescoped into a prototype, and then a couple of weeks later, it got rescoped into, well, let's just insert that as an iframe and as a new feature on one of the pages. So it was really the reason it was so short was because I saw that type of egregious mismanagement of a major project, combined with technical aspects like really the shortest way I can say it is it was the most buzzword-driven development workplace I've ever been at. They had Docker, but it took 45 minutes to build locally, produce a 6 GB image, and the performance was so slow due to using Rails that it was essentially useless. And I caused a 6-hour outage because I changed a Webpack configuration setting, which broke the build. And the next build actually shipped out broken artifacts because the pipeline wasn't set up correctly. Things like that, where I was just seeing every aspect of the business not function. That was the one where I woke up with a pit of dread in my chest and put in my notice. It was just, it was on all of the walls. It was spray painted everywhere, all over the furniture too.
Wow. Yeah, I forgot you had talked a little bit about this in the chat. But it's nice to hear it, in real time. And that's
actually
one
more note on that before
Sure,
we
yeah.
move past it. While I was there, I found a security vulnerability where a wholly unsecured API endpoint was serving customer information, including home addresses and first and last names, with sequential IDs. So that was that has remained the most egregious mismanagement of customer data I've encountered, and actually, based on their domain, it would probably have gotten them fined a substantial amount of money if anyone had found it outside of the company.
That's quite terrifying. And thank goodness you saw that, because I don't think they were prepared for whatever the ramifications would be, for sure. Well, I am happy to see that we have a couple more hands here raised in the chat, and we're going to be shifting a little bit to make sure that we get through all the text questions as well as let people have a chance to speak. So I'm going to go ahead and let this next person go. We have one of our members, Bryce. I'm going to butcher this. Sogigian. You can tell me if I'm wrong or not here in a second. But happy to have you here. And you're on. Welcome to the chat.
Yeah, it's Sohigian, but I also misspelled it when I made my Discord username, so I can't really blame you.
Fair enough.
I I had like one primary question is like, how do you approach the job search when you're currently working at a role and you're looking for a new role? Do you do more like cold outreach? Do you do any like, do you just ask for referrals? Like, how do you approach sourcing opportunities?
Good question.
Sure, I can take that one first. Most of my job sourcing has been pretty passive, unless I'm actively unhappy, in which case I've tended to just quit and dedicate 100% of my time to job hopping, or to finding to applying for a new job. Most of the rest of the time, I'll just on the flag in LinkedIn saying looking for opportunities and see what rolls my way. I had pretty good luck doing that. Obviously, it's something that you can't do early in your career. Once you have a couple of items on your resume, the volume of inbound requests like that kicks up nicely. But other than that, I've mostly applied, because I work in the startup ecosystem, mostly applied via platforms like AngelList or Hacker News, who is hiring sort of smaller time job application sites.
That makes a lot of sense considering your career focusing in the startup world. And Kevin, I think you spoke to this a little bit, but if let's expand on what you've done so far and speak to how you would potentially look for your next job.
Yeah, so I don't really go out and actively job search. It's usually either passive, that someone reaches out at the right time and I say, yeah, let's interview. Or if I'm in a position where it's kind of like, I want to go, there's no passive, someone didn't reach out at the right time and ask. Usually I just reach out to recruiters that have emailed me in the past. Like I have like 2 Facebook recruiters. I have like 1 at Microsoft, like 2 at Google. At this point, I just collect recruiters and I reach out when it's time to go. Also, contacts I've made through here and other means, like I can reach out usually and say, hey, do you have anything open? I don't really apply for jobs anymore as a result, so it's usually just via connections.
Yeah, 2 very different approaches, right? One is very much, in that semi-traditional pipeline of reaching out, and you have sort of let your resume and profile speak for itself. And it's clearly worked for both of you. So that should hopefully give people in the call a little bit of hope if they're still job hunting. There's multiple ways to find work out here. So good question. Let's hop back on over to our lovely list. Oh, we have one from our very own Ender, one of our senior mods, who actually is also going to be participating in one of our AMAs coming up. So be on the lookout for a notification for that. Ender asks, common advice is don't be a job hopper. Have you felt any issues in the hiring process related to hopping jobs too much? And are you worried about this down the road or for a longer term?
So the common advice isn't to be to not be a job hopper. the common advice is to not job hop really fast. If you find yourself hopping every 3 to 4 months, companies are going to look down and say you're just going to join for 4 months and leave. But if you're hopping every 1 to 2 years, they get that. They're kind of like, oh, okay, he's going for a promo or looking for something new, just like you would do an internal transfer if the opportunity came up. So that seems more normal than 4 jobs with 3 months of tenure each. So don't do short-term hopping. Just 1 to 2 plus years is perfectly fine.
I'm curious how Carl will
Sorry,
approach this
Carl.
one.
Yeah, well, someone who did have 3 jobs in a row where I stayed for less than 6 months, never felt that it was a particularly strong impediment to anything in my career. Although I will say, I haven't applied for a job since that stint of 3 jobs in a row. I got a cold outreach on LinkedIn, applied, interviewed, got my current job, and I've been there since. And that was 18. So it never really. While I was applying, when I had 2 jobs in 9 months, ultimately, I was asked about it. It did come up in interviews. I think one of the things that contributed to making it not be a problem in my job search was that, my first 2 jobs were much longer term. I had the student startup where I stayed there for very nearly 2 years. Then I did a 6-month contract position, and then I spent 15 months at a startup. So by having those longer tenures, especially early in my career, it lent a lot more weight when I said, this is an anomaly. I didn't like my manager. I spoke pretty honestly about the problems I saw, especially because I had read those books and felt that I could say they were doing X, Y, Z. I read in, these 2 books that you should do, ABC instead. It was, I got a lot of very positive responses from that. And I think that was one of the things that helped me move into senior roles. But yeah, I think that if your first 3 jobs in a row are all less than 6 months, I think that is going to be much more of an issue than if you have 1 job where you stayed at for more than a year and then you job hop for extremely short tenures.
That's actually some great balanced feedback, because obviously both of you are coming from different perspectives, but in a way, rather than contradict, sort of built on each other's perspective, which is just demonstrate some level of stability in your career. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's really a matter of the narrative that people see about you and what you're able to create for yourself. So I'm going to go ahead and look at one other question from here. We're coming up on, I believe it's going to be 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time or Daylight Savings Time, whichever one we're in. I've lost track of time. This next question comes from one of our server members, Braxiatel. How do you try and avoid bridge burning? And I think this one's going to be most apt for Carl to answer, though, of course, Kevin, feel free to hop in. So the question being, how do you avoid or try and avoid burning bridges?
I can hop on that first.
All you.
Yeah, obviously a number of from my longer explanation or longer description of all of my job changes, many of the bridges were burned, some of them not by me. I think the best way is to manage process and be cognizant of what effect you will have on your team. Not so much on the business. Ultimately, one engineer, one developer leaving the company is not going to be make or break for the entire company. Maybe you're midway through, maybe don't quit your job midway through a 2-month project. because then, you know, your manager is not going to have the most favorable impression of you. And if you end up in a situation where, you know, they're probably not going to badmouth you in a referral or, you know, in a reference check rather. But if you run into them at a conference or you want to get coffee and see what they're up to, and, you know, you're on the job hunt and seeing what's out there, having that positive relationship where you consideration into what their needs are and not just your own is a good way to do that. Obviously, you can't always do that. Honestly, in many of my cases, I looked at where I was working and who I was working for and thought, I'm never going to see this person again in my career. It does not matter what the outcome here is. It's been pretty true. Industry's pretty big. As long as you're not in a very... I work in product development, building web apps. That is a very large market. There are a ton of people trying to fundraise to get web engineering teams. I've never encountered, other than people who have helped me get my next job, I've never encountered the same people at more than one job in my career. Obviously, if you're in a more niche area, like if you're doing like machine learning research, like, yeah, okay, you should probably not think on being able to burn a bridge and having it all work out great. But I think the less specialized, the less specialized the work you do is, I think the less burning a bridge really matters. You know, once you burn a bridge, you can't go back. Like, there's no one doing that. As long as you're aware of the situation you're creating and thinking it through, I think that there are ways to avoid having any sort of career impacts from it.
Good point. And it's also important to note that it's not always, like you said, it's not always you burning that bridge, right? Kevin, you're coming from a little different perspective, particularly because of how you get your jobs, but what are your insights?
Here, burning a bridge, the scene I think about is from The Matrix, where where he goes off on his boss and takes a keyboard and whacks his coworker with it.
Oh, you're thinking of Wanted, the wannabe Matrix.
Yeah. That's when you really burn a bridge. The question is, what are we talking about when we think about burning bridges? Are we talking about having a bad reference or calling up your old employer and them going off on you and saying he was a horrible employee? Legally, they're not allowed to do that. They are only allowed to confirm that you worked there from time A to time B. If they don't, they could get in a lot of trouble and you could sue them, and that's ugly for everyone. So you're not going to have that problem, hopefully, if they're going by standards. But there are scenarios where can you come back? And usually that's just performance related. Was that person good at their job? If not, don't hire them back. Or in a scenario, something like Carl mentioned, did you leave in the middle of a big project that was pretty dependent on you, or did you leave without providing notice and retraining your replacement in scenarios where that matters? Most of that comes down to just doing something polite, like giving notice. Yeah, so that's the only thing I could think of is just be good at your job, and yeah, you shouldn't really burn a bridge, legally at least. You might have a former manager or something be mad that you left, but they cannot do anything about it.
Yeah, and after hearing you say that, I think it's important that I clarify my definition of burning a bridge here. I definitely never like all the like half-baked, like fuck you, you're cool, I'm out. Like, don't do that. That's not burning a bridge. That's just like incredibly toxic behavior. But there have absolutely been circumstances where I have not, where I have felt I've done my job well, and I felt that the reason I want to leave is because others in the environment were not living up to the standards that I held myself to. And I'll still follow all the, proper protocols there, like, give your notice, follow the proper escalation path for it, like talk to your manager in private or the rest of the team, all those sorts of, etiquette things around leaving a job. But sometimes, sometimes it doesn't work out, and sometimes you won't have a positive relationship. As far as I know, the big question, one of the only questions that companies will use as a source of signal on we hire this person or not in a reference check is this person eligible for rehire? It's essentially asking, they left, did they leave of their own accord, or were they forced out, or were they fired? Were there behavioral issues? Like, they can't ask any of those questions, but asking whether they're eligible for rehire, they get a little bit of signal on there is an amicable or not separation.
Yeah, then that's actually a good point that you guys kind of drilled down on, which is people assume that burning a bridge is a more grand affair than it probably really is, because companies understand that we're all here trying to do what's best for ourselves. I mean, the company hired you because the company thought it was in their best interest, so naturally you're going to find a new opportunity as well. So really just comes down to, what you mentioned. Are you a toxic employee? Are you painful? Were you painful to management? Is there a red flag on you because they had to push you out? The things that people would expect to indicate that you were a problem. But beyond that, I think maybe a more nuanced addition to the conversation is, how do you avoid burning a bridge with an individual who works in a company that you're leaving? And I think that you guys sort of touched on it, in which you essentially said, be a good employee. Don't, make it clear that you are contributing and that you are a valued member of the team. And you're essentially making yourself more valuable when you leave because you're going out and getting more experience. So they might be incentivized to try to bring you back, because if you were good before, there's a good chance you'll be even better once you get more experience, at your next job or even at your next level. So I would say for anybody listening, bear in mind what it means to be valuable, and that will help you understand and contextualize what burning a bridge really looks like. So great insight and way to capitalize on each other. So we have a few more questions here. We're a little past 6 o'clock Pacific time. We'll be trying to wrap up here in about 20 minutes, but if anybody wants to raise their hand and get their question in, just let us know. We'll see if we can get you in here and get your question asked live. But until then, we move forward. So we actually have a question from one of our server members, Jamas. It actually is sort of a multi-part, so we'll try and break it down here. Did your attitude towards job hopping change in any way with the introduction of any major, life status changes, such as getting married, having children, anything where you desired more consistency or stability in your life due to other factors? Was any of that related to how you changed jobs?
Well, I am not quite 30 and still single with no kids, so I may not be able to give the answer that you want there. I actually, one of the things that I partially attribute to the level of job searching that I've done, the level of I don't know, tumult in my professional career, is that early in my college career, I was diagnosed as likely having a mild form of bipolar. So one of the things that has been it's not even that it's important to me, it's just that I think that it's something that is necessary for me to function well in a team, is finding somewhere that manages to jive with my natural quirks. I know that I am a I can be a strong personality. I know that sometimes I can. Some weeks I might be more intense or more likely to like cause a minor personal conflict. Or just come in a little bit too hot to a technical discussion, things like that. So finding coworkers who I respect and respect them personally, their technical skills, who follow best practices as I am aware of them, helps me balance myself out by avoiding putting myself into situations where I know I will likely to cause some kind of issue. That's something that I have selected for very heavily in my career.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing something very personal, because I feel like that's something probably several people in the chat can relate to, that sometimes the thing that makes it hard just to hold down the job, and that might make you feel that you don't belong in that job and you need to move, is something that's sometimes less about the job and something that's a part of you that you're struggling with, that you're working through. And as somebody who wants to continuously vocalize our recognition of mental health issues here, you're not alone. We actually have that mental health channel here for that purpose, here in the Discord server, specifically for people to talk about things that they're struggling with, come up with strategies, methodologies to try and figure out, is this problem I'm having with my job or the job search a matter of, capability, or is it just simply something in me that I have to work on, either by myself or sometimes with professional help? And there's nothing more humble and empowering than getting the help you need. So I appreciate you highlighting a little bit of that.
Absolutely, and you're right. It's something that I have put a significant amount of work into independently. Trying to develop habits or reading self-help books to explore what habits I might try and develop. Talking with therapists. I've talked to a number of therapists over the years. I've tried medication. I'm currently not on anything. Something that I've managed to, after 10 years working professionally, I've managed to find a balance for myself to where I'm able to just, manage it on my own. So maybe that's something that I'm fortunate to have a mild enough form of whatever light cracking I have to have been able to compensate for it without significant external intervention.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely, props to you for everything you do here, obviously within the server and your contributions, and over at Reactive Flux, but also with just your ability to manage that with your career. So I'm curious, Kevin, you had mentioned that for you, most of the time you were just transitioning from job to job because somebody reached out. Was there ever any, as the question says, like, has your attitude about that changed with each job hop per se, or have you been pretty consistent?
I mean, I'm looking at the question, and I mean, I'm never having kids and I'm never getting married. Like that life stability and consistency is not really an issue for me. I'm never going to be in a spot where I feel attached and there's a ton of stress about how to move. But there is always the stress of moving. There's the stress of how to move from one place to another or across the country, and where do I stay in apartments and all that. I actually kind of manage that. There's always two options. There's moving yourself, and there's always having the company move you. And I always find the least stressful way of doing it is just letting the company use their moving resources to move you and everything you have. And then the only thing I have to worry about is moving my cat, and I guess plane in this case, because they won't move that for me. So there is still a little bit of stress, but I always find that limiting it really comes down to using the resources you're given for that change. Yeah, and I don't really know how to address the children or marriage part because other people might. I suspect that probably does come with a bigger pressure, especially with schools and stuff.
I just want to highlight real briefly that yes, folks, he did mention that companies will not move his plane. That is indeed what he said. In case you're new here, yes, Kevin is a pilot, so just want to make sure people appreciate the range of human experience we have going on here.
Yeah.
And just to highlight, naturally the question was referring specifically to some examples like getting married or having kids or anything of that nature, because those are pretty common, uh, moments or milestones or status changes in life. But sometimes there are other aspects of life, like, perhaps you have family members that you're close to that you have to worry about. Maybe there's something that happens to you physically or mentally or emotionally or what have you, major breakups, things like that. Just things to bear in mind, that yes, those things can affect you, but I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to a matter of what your personal tolerance is within with your own career goals and the nature of your relationships with other people and how much those things dictate the next move you make. Which I think actually dovetails into this next part of the question, which was essentially, did the emotional weight, such as the stress or anxiety that can come along with changing jobs, did that become less? Did it decrease? Did it dwindle over time? Or has it been pretty consistent throughout your career so far? And do you figure out how to manage it better as you go?
For me, it's just consistent. Every move, it's the same. It's the same pressure. It's the same everything. The only difference for me is I just get more stuff the more I move. For example, my next move, I'll have to sell a house and somehow pack up like 3 bedrooms back to an apartment. But yeah, it's really just the same for me and just more how to manage.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and I've actually recently made the move into a nomadic lifestyle, so I've been on the road for about 3 months now. I mean, as far as like area for some job changes and things, I slightly intentionally, partially accidentally, developed my career to be in a very general, non-specialist area, which is one of the reasons I've been able to work in so many industries. And by doing so, it has maximized my optionality in a lot of different dimensions. Because ultimately, like, most companies need UI. Even if it's like internal tools or a network appliances front end for the system administrator. Like, my particular niche of software development, I could pretty much go to most parts of the country and be able to find some kind of job doing what I do. That's one of the benefits of. I bet very early, very hard on React in my career, and that turned out to be a very good bet. I could very well have bet on Backbone and not had that play out quite so well. But some of the choices I made with where I wanted to focus my energy has made changing jobs, changing locations, changing my life situation much easier.
And I also want to highlight, we highlighted Kevin's plane. Carl, where are you right now? Just so that people know.
I am in Alaska right now. Last week I was in Colorado. The week before that I was in New Mexico.
Look at that. I mean, we're talking about opposite ends of the spectrum here. I mean, you can't get more different lifestyle than that. Incredible. And that's one of the fun things about this is you start to figure out over time what works for you, right? Some people are late bloomers to their careers. Some people get started early and they hit the ground running. Some people do the traditional route of school and getting a degree and all that. And some people, they just jump right in right out of high school. And you really, as we were going through the everybody's different experiences. It's nice to see that despite Kevin and Carl having such different backgrounds and experiences, that they have found their own ways to essentially figure out what works for them. And that's essentially what we want for everybody here, is figure out what works for you and identify it and try to be consistent. Well, just want to highlight one additional thing. We have the hand raising feature available. If you're interested in asking your question directly, feel free to raise your hand. We'll see if we can get you here in the chat. Looks like we have a brave soul here. Kelvin Craig, new to Discord. Oh, not interested anymore. Hopped off already. Looks like we have a visitor. Let me bring them on real quick. Hello, welcome to the chat. Looks like you're muted. What's your question?
Alright, so I just saw this.
Oh, no problem. Looks like they're unfamiliar with the Discord stage format. No problem. Feel free to listen in and learn more. See if we can get somebody else here. Looks like Bloxy, we have you coming on now. Any second. Oh, looks like they hopped off. All right, well, let's go back to the text questions real quick. We actually have a question here from somebody whose name I identify with, Man Without a Plan. And that question here says, do you feel that job hopping has significantly impacted your rate of compensation? If so, how much do you feel that it has affected it? And I'll go ahead and let that open up to the floor.
Yeah, it definitely has. I would not be where I was without job hopping. I've either gotten promos or significant pay increases through job hopping. I would still be at Google, probably making less if I stayed there for 5-6 years. I mean, if I leave next year, I'll probably get a senior engineering job at like Facebook or something. So, and that's what, upwards of like 400 grand or something. Yeah, that's why I do it half the time. It's just better pay.
Very nice.
Yeah, I would also say absolutely. My first job was at the student startup. That was unpaid for a good while because we started as students and we didn't have any money. So I mean, my salary history from there, I started at 50, went to 70, to 90, 110, 130, 130 again, 140, and now I'm at 170. And yeah, and with my most recent job at the non-cash compensation attached to it obviously the equity, the cryptocurrency company, so it's not equity, but the non-cash compensation I've received has the potential to be a life-changing amount of money, but all of the other startups went to zero effectively. My first startup bombed. My startup after that, they actually recently got acquired and canceled all common stock, so all employees got zero. So that's one of the things about startups is non-cash compensation is a lottery, and so there's a chance that you win the lottery, but most of the times you lose. So one of the advantages of job hopping is that you can dabble in a lot of places, and if you stay long enough to vest, you can get a small amount of lottery tickets at a lot of different places. Yeah, absolutely. Job hopping, even ignoring equity, has been the main driver for promotions and raises in my career.
Yeah, good feedback. Definitely something to consider, right? That, part of the reason people hop is sometimes just for the pay. And that's something that we can try to paint as purely for philosophical or for personal reasons, like the strict work that you do. But sometimes it just comes down to feeling like you have to move to get paid what you're worth, right? And that's a numbers game. So it's good to hear that both of you keep that in mind, and that it's not just about the work, but it's also being compensated for it accordingly. So definitely good question there.
I moved to get paid more than I'm worth.
Right, that's the dream, right?
I still like coming from the military, and we're having this talk in the event chat. It's unbelievable how much you can make after the military.
Interesting. That's actually it's funny. Veteran job hopper has a different spin to it now that you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Well, we have a couple hands raised again. Looks like, I believe it's Lesethal here, who's a member. Let's have him come in real quick and give their question live. Welcome to the chat. What's your question?
Guess we can move on then.
No problem. Looks like we have a visitor, Ribnik, visiting our stage today. Let's bring them in real quick and see what they have to say. Uh-oh. We lost Kevin. Yeah, Discord's taking a minute to bring Ribnik in.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I had to accept.
Seems we've lost Kevin.
Oh, looks like Kevin upped off. Welcome to the chat, Ribnik.
Hello.
What's your question?
I was just curious. I just hopped in not too long ago, so I was just curious. How much time do you think you'd have to spend to in a job to move up in pay or whatever you need? Like, what's like a minimum time?
Can you give a little bit more context to that?
Like, how long would you have to work at one job before you move on, essentially?
Oh, I see. That's a pretty open-ended question. Let's see if Kevin or Carl feels like they want to expand on a previous answer to that.
And sorry, I think my speaker cut out for a second there, but I heard the rephrasing of the question. Yeah, I touched on that a little bit earlier when I talked about my shortest tenure. I think that ultimately, when you know you have to leave, I think it's good to trust your gut on that. I think you should educate your gut by reading things about the industry and reading books. Like for example, a book that I recommend to everybody is The Manager's Path. It has a tremendous wealth of experience wealth of advice on how to function as an individual contributor, especially if your goal is to end up on the manager track. And even if you want to end up on the executive track, by the end of the book, it's talking about how to be a director or a VP. But yes, I think if you've put the work in to learn what a healthy workplace looks like, and you recognize that where you are is not that, then I don't think there is really a minimum tenure, because especially if you can speak eloquently as to what problems you saw and what the solutions you tried to recommend were. My experience is that people look on that extremely favorably. It definitely does help if you have a longer tenure in your job history, just to prove that you can do it. You are capable of staying in one place for a long time. But in general, I don't believe there is a minimum tenure to stay at any one job.
I guess for me, I could comment in addition to that. Um, as a counterexample, I know someone who, in a year, was almost going to be a director at Facebook and then left to be a director at somewhere else. Only stayed at Facebook for like a year and a half. So even at the high level exec positions, you could still job hop pretty frequently. For me, I usually just aim for like a year and a half to 2 years. Yeah, unless I'm happy there or something new is happening. That's usually when I look.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's definitely something that we've sort of touched on where there's no hard and fast rule, right? It ties back to the idea of what's your career story, and when someone's looking at it and discussing it with you, you know, do they see somebody who is, qualified or not? And oftentimes, that has nothing to do with a specific amount of time. For some people, they need, 5 years to really demonstrate competence. Some people need just a few months because they're a rock star. And everything in between, right? So good good answer to that is really it depends. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna take one other question from the community here. We have Manny, our community contributor. Let's bring him on now. Manny, welcome to the chat. What's your question for us today?
Hey, everybody. So, my question is a little bit of devil's advocate of our topic today. There's a lot of places, including CS Career Questions and Blinds, that will recommend that you job hop at just about any opportunity. What stories or signals do people commonly say it's time to go when you see it as a signal as time to stay?
Ooh, very nice. Who wants to take that one first?
I guess I can. A lot of times, I think it comes down to people saying, I could get more money by going somewhere else. Recruiters don't care that you just got to your current job. They'll snipe you and move you to their company just for their money. I see people who are on track for, let's say, senior engineer, or on track for a good promo and so on, and 5-6 months in they'll be like, oh, here's another shiny new job, let's take that just for more money. So I think if you're on track for something like senior engineer, leaving after you get it and getting a much bigger paycheck actually would make more sense and mean that you should stay where you're at until you get it. So I could see that being a scenario where people think they should leave, and in reality, they probably should stay for a little bit.
And maybe to give the opposite advice as some of the things I've said before. Sometimes moments of strife in a company are when you have the most ability to, and I'm talking about small companies here since I've mostly worked at startups. If there's a challenge that the company is facing, that the team is facing, you're having with like getting work done, sometimes maybe the best option there is to just throw up your hands and say, okay, I'm finding somewhere else. I can't work under these conditions. But maybe that's a challenge that you can rise to. If instead of saying, "Nope, I can't do this. I'm going to go somewhere else," you say, "Okay, this is not a wall. This is this is something I can climb," and figuring out what skills you need to develop in order to overcome the challenge you're encountering. Maybe that'll end up being the life-changing experience that you remember fondly in your when you're reflecting back on your career. You think, wow, I'm glad I didn't leave that job. I would never have made, director of whatever if I had given up on that challenge early on. So I don't know. I think that it's really hard to give rules of thumb on things like this because every situation is so different, and it's just so hard to predict how things will play out.
I love questions like this because, you know, as Manny said, it's almost like as a way to take the experience that you have and sort of challenge you to essentially think the opposite. You know, what choices or what opportunities do you have to see that will make you stay when other people say go? And I love the answers that I've heard so far. So great question, great answers there. We are a little bit over on time. We're just past 6:30 Pacific time. We're gonna go ahead and take our last question from one of our active server members, Reno. Reno asks, what is the panel's opinion on bell curves in performance appraisals? Good, bad, evil, any alternatives? And as a follow-up question, how do you have such a nice voice, FF? Spill your secrets. Well, the secret for me is, you know, eat your green vegetables, listen to your mother, stay up till 3 a.m. moderating a chat. That'll often do it. But back to the spirit of the real question here. What is the opinion on bell curves in performance appraisals? And I'm going to go ahead and let that question be open-ended, and you two can determine how you want to interpret it if it's a little vague for you.
Well, first of all, I think the real question was the awesome voice. I do always wonder how to get that deep voice that I don't have.
It's just a little box I put in front of the mic. It's
I mean, I could do. Hold on one sec.
Yes, I can't wait for an app just for this purpose.
Wait to hear what Kevin's about to come up with.
Yeah.
Oh, I gotta figure out my mic. I think I have the ability to turn my voice up or down, and add. I can add like amphitheater, radio voice, and all that. So
Oh, yeah,
I think
that's
I could
right.
do this. Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely have to try that one time. Voice modulate everyone.
Yeah. So the way I interpreted that is Amazon's lower 10% get fired thing. I hate that with a passion. If you have 10 awesome engineers and all of them are doing their job just as well as they should be, you should not be firing them. So I hate the whole curve thing. Yeah. I also hate the fact that they'll only give like the best performers to the top 5 when, let's say, you have 10 out of 10 that are the best performers. They're all equal. Why not give them all that rating? Yeah, I can rant on that for a long time. It sucks.
Quite passionate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have a ton of insight here. Most of the I think I want to say 6 or 7 out of the 8 companies I worked at did not have any kind of formal performance evaluation process. So, you know, let alone something like a bell curve. I mean, most of the places I worked at, if they tried to do a bell curve, they've only got 8 samples. So it's just not something that works for the scale of companies that I work for. I don't think I can really say too much more about performance evaluations because of that. I have very limited experience with them.
Yeah.
Maybe I can fill in a little bit here as the lovely moderator. So I have worked in environments with this is most common in like manufacturing or like union oriented work, where sometimes tenure is the determination first and foremost, and then from there you sort of filter down to the opinion of the manager themselves. From what I've seen, and you know, again, your mileage may vary depending on what company you're in, what part of the country or the world you are. these are all different factors, but what I've found oftentimes is that the idea of metrics oftentimes, if it's not rigorously defined in some type of way with a frequent method of measurement, whether that's engaging with your manager, whether it's, in some jobs where it's just like tickets or PRs or whatever, if those things aren't clearly defined, sometimes those things can be really, really subjective to the point where, you might get the boot despite being super productive, like Kevin was talking about with Amazon, just because, in Amazon's case, they have a quota. But in the case of other companies, sometimes it's purely just a matter of you're not contributing what is necessary to the team from the perspective of the manager at the time. You're not contributing meaningfully enough in a way that is important going forward. I'll give a quick anecdote for myself. I actually ended up leaving a team due to the fact that despite sort of performing all of the glue work that kept the rest of the development team really focused and engaged, my manager ended up telling me that I wasn't necessarily going to be able to move forward with the team when COVID hit. And so I ended up taking a transfer to another team just because, I wanted to be on a team that would give me a chance to develop and focus on development if possible. And that experience reminded me, and hopefully will be a warning to anybody out there who tries to sort of, serve the needs of the whole rather than you, the individual. Be careful about that, because sometimes if your manager isn't aware of how to measure your value and how you contribute, it can come back to bite you despite the value that you bring. And so that's just a little tidbit that I hope adds to the conversation there. So with that,
absolutely.
Any additional feedback?
What you said.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And I guess one of the few experiences I've had with performance reviews is that my current company began actually doing them. I started keeping track of, basically I started using my to-do list, my little scratch pad of what I need to do for the day, and turned that into a weekly, here's what I got done list. So then when we start going into review season, I have 52 notes that I've saved to my computer that are, here's the 15 things I did this week. Here's, so then I can take those, narrow it down, say, these are the impacts I had on the company. And having that source material was a huge, it was very beneficial, and I needed to actually make arguments as for why I am a good employee.
Geez, where were you at the beginning of COVID? I could have used you. No, but it all served a purpose in the end, and it gives me a story to share here. So I don't regret it one bit. So I just want to, go ahead and briefly touch on a few points here. We're coming to the close of our AMA, and I want to thank Carl and Kevin for taking the time to come on today. From all across the country. I mean, in their case, they're a little concentrated in the Pacific Northwest, but I want to, thank everybody who came in here to listen, all of our moderators and contributors, everybody who just happened to see us pop up in your feed on Discord and said, what's this about? I just want to say thank you for taking the time and listening, and what makes all of this possible. We only do this because of you and what matters to you. We'll be soliciting feedback from everybody in terms of the format and the types of events that we're trying to do. We really want to know what you think about how we run these and what we should do going forward. So please, 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 when we request your feedback, please submit it. We sincerely appreciate it. Shouldn't take up too much of your time. And as Kevin had mentioned, we will be having an event in a couple weeks that we'll be announcing where it's it's even more senior, even more experienced folks coming in and discussing what they do and how they got where they are. And I'm sure you're going to love hearing about it, because they might be speaking about your future and what you'll be doing someday. So before we wrap up, I just want to make sure that we get some final thoughts if necessary. Carl, Kevin, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to add one more thing when it comes to plugging in our feedback survey. We're also looking for mods and contributors all the time. So there's an active mod application and contributor application. Feel free to fill it out. We'll evaluate it and hopefully bring you on as staff to help out.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to make just a little bit of a closing comment here. One of the things that I'm cognizant of when talking about job hopping in my career is that there's been a couple of points. There's been a couple of aspects of my life that I feel have made it easier for me. For one thing, I was fortunate enough to never really have. I had enough of a safety net, a nest egg, whatever you want to call it, to where, if I was out of work for 6 months or a year, I wasn't going to go homeless. So I never really had that much risk associated with leaving a job, which enabled me to job hop more aggressively than I might have otherwise because I didn't need to have something lined up before I left. And similarly, because of who I am, it's pretty well researched that there is an assumption of competence based on appearance. And I happen to have an appearance to where people assume that I'm competent. Others don't have that, and that would be another impediment to changing jobs. I just wanted to, it's one thing to talk about, it's one thing to give advice about changing jobs, but I think it's something that some people are able to do more easily than others, and I think that's just important to give name to and point out.
No, I appreciate that, Carl, because this is definitely true. It's something that talking about failures and successes is great, but contextualizing it, acknowledging the advantages and privileges that each of us may or may not have, especially because if I'm going to be honest, a lot of this stuff is going to apply most to people here in the US. And so sometimes it's just important to make sure that when you're listening in, you're contextualizing. If you feel like something doesn't necessarily match your unique situation, totally understand that. That's what the chat is for. And as Carl said, Carl has his experience, Kevin has his experience, I have my experience. And we know that you have your own experience, and we want to make sure that if there were questions that were answered and you're like, that doesn't quite fit me. That's not really, what I'm going through. It doesn't really fit my situation and meet my needs. We're here to listen. So we've had some great engagement in event chat today. I hope that folks carry that over into our other areas for discussion. Make sure if you have a specific career question for us, ask it in career questions. We have a great group of contributors who are constantly hopping in there at all hours of day and night, giving feedback. And if you just want to have like a general chat about a particular topic in the field, that's what tech chat is for. And if you just want to make friends and talk about some things that you're interested in, that's what Off Topic is there for as well as all the miscellaneous channels that we have for different subjects, so that you really get the sense that we're listening to each one of you as you bring your unique self to a conversation online. And that's really important to us here at CSCH. So, Carl, thank you for highlighting that fact.
Yeah, and just a small addition to that. Speaking of unique experiences, we are going to keep having these. If you have a unique experience or you're in a position where you want to share that experience, we're going to be looking for new event host. It doesn't always have to be staff. It could be anyone, as long as you're willing to spend an hour and a half or two kind of sharing your experience with the community. So feel free to reach out if you're interested.
Absolutely agreed, Kevin. We're always looking for people who have unique stories that they want to share and that we want to build upon and ensure that we reach everybody who might benefit from it. So thanks for adding that. Well, everyone, it's been a lovely evening. I'm going to get back to my whiskey and sweet tea like a good Texan down here. And I hope that you all enjoy your weekend. Carl, I hope you enjoy your time in Alaska. Kevin, I hope you enjoy your plan if you have time this weekend.
Oh,
And with
I
that-
am not going to enjoy this weekend flying at 110 degrees. I'm going to be flying. I'm just not going to enjoy it.
Fair enough. Sometimes the fun is work, right?
Yeah. I have the
I
check
will-
ride next Thursday, so I need to prep for it. And unfortunately, it's hot.
Well, I am
hot
going on a
snap.
glacier tour tomorrow, so I'll be sending some cold energy your way.
Please do. I did a glacier tour. It's awesome.
That sounds amazing. Please drop the photos in the photography channel because I'm sure they're going to be amazing like your other pics.
100%.
Excellent. So, to everybody here, once again, we thank you for listening. You make all of this possible. It's why we do what we do. And we hope you join us for the next one. We appreciate your time. Enjoy your weekend. CSCH
guys.
signing off.